Good afternoon, everybody. You know, you start to hear about all kinds of risks when you're planning your retirement. Most recently, we've started to talk about inflation again. There's always a risk of higher taxes. We are currently getting close to nothing on savings. And of course, there's always the skyrocketing cost of healthcare, risk of long-term care. But when you're retired or if you're nearing retirement, the greatest granddaddy risk of them all could be something you're not expecting. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to be talking about what's called the sequence of returns risk. And ignoring sequence of returns could, well, it can decimate another than otherwise very healthy financial portfolio. So welcome to this week's Market Huddle. Most of you already know I'm Joe Lucey. Glad you could join us here on this beautiful Twin Cities Monday as we are June 14th here. So what exactly is the sequence of returns risk? Well, what it is, it's a real possibility that you could retire into a market correction, or it could be a retiring into a bear market. And if that occurs in those first few years of retirement, it can be absolutely life-changing. Keep in mind, anybody that's within that golden decade, what I call the age between 59 and a half and 70 and a half, if you're starting to get serious about your retirement, make sure you heed warning here, because sequence of returns, it's a combination of losses. It's coupled with withdrawals from those losses. It's locking in losses that you can't recover from. And that's the surest way that I know that somebody could end up going broke in retirement. So we're going to talk a little bit about sequence of returns risk. We'll talk a little bit about show you a case example of what it means for you. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to protect yourself. So let's go ahead and jump on in. I'll go ahead and hide my picture here so we can focus on the slides. Here's that disclaimer. Most of you have seen the disclaimer in the past. It's basically says, I am not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. We don't interpret tax law here at Secured Retirement. However, and I don't work for the federal government. We do specialize. I'm a certified financial planner. We do specialize in helping families in and near retirement. So what is this sequence of returns risk? Well, it's the risk that there's a downturn in the stock market or bear market right away in your retirement or within the first few years. Now, the combination of these stock market losses, withdrawals, locking in losses, it can absolutely devastate a retirement. Now, according to CNBC, they say that the consequences of retiring into a bad market, which, let's face it, is nothing that anybody can plan, right? It's beyond our control. But if you retire into a down market, CNBC tells us that the consequences can be so severe, they can end up leaving you with 2/3 less money for the rest of your life. And that's why we want to make sure everybody is bringing sequence of returns risk into the retirement planning. It's something we want to be looking at and making sure that we're planning around. So let me show you a case example here. There's two brothers. And both of these brothers have $500,000 in their retirement savings. They're both going to withdraw $30,000 a year. Now, Steve, the older of the two brothers, he retires in 1990. Bill, 10 years younger than Steve, he's going to retire in 2000. Now, what's the result for these two? Everything else is the same except a 10-year gap. They're taking out $30,000 a year. But when we overlay what the markets did in their retirement years, you can see that Steve here, the older brother, well, he didn't do so bad. 1990, he was down 4%. He took out his 30,000. You can see that he's down to 449, this very top row here. But then, the market kind of did okay for the next 9 out of those 10 years, up 20%, 4%. And boy, even after taking out withdrawals of 30,000 a year, Steve's in pretty good shape. He started off with $500,000. He's sitting there at $1.2 million. Now, keep in mind, he's probably at Thanksgiving or Christmas telling his brother how easy this retirement gig is. And, well, Bill, he does the same thing as Steve. It worked great for Steve. The problem is he's retiring in 2000. Now we all know that 2000, represents two 30-some% drops in the stock market in a 10-year period of time. It's probably the absolute worst time. And sometimes families will say, or somebody will say, well, Joe, you're cherry picking which years this is. And I guess that you would expect that it isn't going to look the same. But it's true, right? I am cherry picking the worst time to retire here. So Bill here retires in 2000 because if you can retire in the worst market we've seen since the Depression, well, then, let's set the bar high and make sure that we can clear it. So Bill, though, however, he retires in 2000. We know the market was down 37% in the first 3 years there. 2000, 2001, the towers came down in New York, 2002, we ended up really nowhere to hide. But, Bill, he's got his obligations. He's got to take 30 a year out. Now the market recovers in 2003, 2004. 2005 was a so-so year. 2006 was looking pretty good. And then wham, we got hit in 2007. October of 2007, market started losing money. Before it was all over, 16 months between 2007 and 2009, the market was down 50%. But Bill's got obligations. He's taken out 30 a year. He's down to $156,000. Now imagine you got Bill and Steve sitting there at Thanksgiving, and one is feeling really good about his retirement, and Bill is wondering if he can move into Steve's basement, right? This is the sequence of returns risk: retiring early or retiring and then having an early drop in the account. And again, what CNBC tells us is that it's can reduce your overall savings by up to 2/3, and that's for the remaining portion of your life. So one thing when we start thinking about sequence of returns, keep in mind that we don't always have control. Somebody might say, hey, I get it. Steve just needs to cut back a little bit on his retirement, right? He maybe can get by with, or I'm sorry, Bill can. He can drop, maybe he can reduce this $30,000 to a $10,000 spend. My experience is that most people don't go broke in retirement. They just start to live that way. And in this case, Bill is probably going to be at least cutting back on some lifestyle expenses. But there are some areas where we can't necessarily control the withdrawals we have to take. So I'm talking about required minimum distributions. Most of you are already aware of this. As clients of secured retirement, at 72, you need to start taking out withdrawals. It starts off a little less than 4%. By the time we're sitting at 80 years old, you're taking out 5%. And if you're fortunate enough to be taking out required distributions in your 90s, it's over 10%. But this is calculated on the year before's account balance. So if you're taking out 4%, the story between Steve and Bill can start to look a little bit like you, right? If you're Bill and you have a required distribution that has to come out, and we aren't aware of market value adjustments or the sequence of returns risk, you could be forced to take out money, locking in those losses, and it's something that we need to be looking at. In fact, most of you have already done this exercise, but we always like to sit down with families, start to look at where you're at today, and start to calculate for you, if you're under age 70, what a required minimum distribution is going to look like. If you've got $1 million in your account at age 60, let's look out 12 years. Say you get a reasonable 6% rate of return on that money. Well, now you're sitting on $2 million. 4% of that's $80,000 a year. What does that mean? What would it mean for you in your retirement? What would it mean for you in your retirement if you retired at the wrong time and all of a sudden ran into a correction or a bear market, a market recession type thing? And, this isn't that unrealistic. We saw this just last spring as everything started locking up with COVID, right? We were down 30-some percent, 37%, I think was the exact number between the first of the year and the March 18th, when the market bottomed out. We were at 18,500 at one point on the Dow. Now today we're at 34,000 and some change. But we saw that, and when families were forced to take out withdrawals, they were locking in losses, and we got to try to help families protect themselves. So what can we do? Well, as I was preparing for this, I wanted to come up with some things that we could all look at Number one, understand this concept of mailbox income. I'm going to put the camera back on here. So, in fact, let's try to do this. Mailbox income is money that hits the checkbook regardless of what's going on Wall Street, right? So if I need $100,000 a year, and I have Social Security here, and maybe I have a pension, or maybe it's rental income, or maybe you've just got money that's protected from, it could be like an annuity or something that's paying you automatic. You don't have to worry what's going on Wall Street. That's the easiest way to protect yourself from sequence of returns. Making sure that you're never forced to lock in these losses because the money that you need to supplement your income is protected or coming from a protected source. Again, it could be a pension, could be Social Security, number of different things. Number two, I think everybody needs to look at their risk score right now. We have been on an absolute tear since everything locked down because of the vaccinations, everything's starting to open up. The market's been doing pretty darn good here for the last 60 days. Usually the old adage was sell in May and go away. This year doesn't seem to be holding that because there's a lot of money in the system. All of that, what that means is that we could see a correction at any time. And if you are retired and going to be taking out withdrawals, let's make sure we're protecting ourselves from that. Have a certain amount of money that is not exposed to the stock market. So if you do have obligations or lifestyle expenses you want to withdraw from early in retirement, or this year, next year, that we protect it. So let's do that. Let's look at your risk score, know what a correction looks like for you. We have several different ways we can mathematically and statistically test that for you. Most of you are familiar with Riskalyze. We can also run through the InStream, which is the where we retire you 1,000 times. Lots of different ways that we can test this to make sure you're in good shape and can be protected from sequence of returns risk. The third thing I think you should be doing, and right now with the 40-year tax lows, I think that 2021 is, we're going to look back at this year, could be next year, as soon as next year, it could be in 3 and 4 years. Who knows when Congress is going to finally address all of the additional debt that they've put on because of the pandemic and fighting the pandemic and these lows and everything. But I think we're going to look back and see that this was a tremendous opportunity to reduce our overall tax footprint, the amount of tax that we're going to pay in our retirement. In fact, a lot of times we can show families where they can save tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of lifetime taxes. And that's a great way to protect yourself from sequence of returns risk. You say, well, why is that, Joe? Well, if you don't have to take out enough money to cover taxes when you take your withdrawals, or if that money is less taxable, means that, instead of taking out 2 or 3 or 4% of your portfolio, maybe you can get by with 1 or 2%. That it allows us to have more limited the amount of withdrawals that have to take out when we see those market corrections. So those are the 3 things I'd take away from this. Let's sit down. Let's make sure that we reevaluate your mailbox income, show you how to optimize that. Number 2, let's look at your portfolio. We'll do it a stress test. We'll put it on the treadmill, and every few minutes we're going to ramp it up until all of a sudden we exhaust the portfolio, and we're going to show you what that looks like and how much you could sustain of market volatility. If you don't like what you see, we can always make adjustments, obviously. And then make sure you have a tax smart strategy. Let's take a look, see what we can do here in 2021 to help reduce your taxes. Ideally, this is something we put together with the 2021, 2022. It could be a 4 to 10 year plan. But we have to be a little nimble on that, because if we see a big correction, or change in the tax code next year, we might want to be able to be a little bit more, make some changes and things. So anyways, I'm going to hang out here for just a second or two. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of wrap up this week's market huddle? It says right on my screen here, don't be shy, start chatting. All right, with that said, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I hope everybody's able to stay cool. It's been hot here for the last couple of days. It sounds like it's a little bit better today than it was most of the weekend, but we should continue to have some nice summer weather here in the Twin Cities, and hope that you're all enjoying some nice weather as well. With that said, I'm going to wrap up this week, and we'll see you back next Monday with next week's Market Huddle. Have a great day. Bye-bye.